Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Plenary's closing session for the 2021 PDG B-5 TA Center virtual convening. We hope you all had a great week of lots of information and lots of sharing. And today, for our closing session, we're going to be speaking and looking backwards to reflect forward. And that's the title of our session, Looking Back and Reflecting Forward. And today we have a great guest with us who is not only a pioneer but a champion in the field of early childhood. And my colleague, Richard Gonzales, will be introducing our guest today. Richard?
Thanks, Tammy. So many of you probably know Joan, but if you don't, if I read her full bio, it would take up the entire time of our session. So I'm just going to highlight a few points for you about Joan Lombardi. Joan is a longtime champion for children. She has actually served in 3 different administrations, including when HHS was with Carter, and HHS was actually called HEW at the time. She was the first director of the Child Care Bureau under the Clinton administration. She was the first deputy assistant secretary for early childhood under the Obama administration. She's now at Georgetown Center for Child and Human Development and an advisor to a number of foundations domestically and globally. She's done a tremendous amount of work, both on the global, in lots of different countries, and you may hear about some of that a little bit more. Most importantly, though, she is a friend to children, families, communities, to me, and to you. And so without further ado, I'm just going to pass the baton on to Joan so she can share her knowledge and experience and advice with all of us. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you so much, Richard and Tammy. I'm very so grateful to be here. It's a very emotional thing for me to come back. I only wish that we were live. I wish that I could see you. I wish I could have been in all your sessions and listened and learned with you, because I know you're all doing tremendous work. I have to, again, reflect a little bit about why this is such an emotional experience for me. First of all, coming back, it's like coming back to a home that you helped build and with a lot of other people. And I reflect on those early days when it seems like the house had no furniture and very little trees around it. And where it's come from those early days is just amazing. So I want to thank Richard and Tammy and the entire new team that's in place, Katie and Miriam and Katie and Bernadine and Ruth, for doing such a terrific job, and all the people that came before them who held this together over many years. It's a wonderful thing, and they're all to be congratulated. And of course, they were backed up by an amazing team of people in the civil service who really make all this happen. I also want to thank you for spending the whole week here, for everything you've done over the last 2 years during such a difficult period. Someone said to me the other day, look at all the things that have happened in the States, and can you imagine what they can do after COVID if they've done all of that during COVID? So I couldn't help but start by thanking you. And I know you've had a lot of tough decisions to make over the years, especially in the last 2 years. We lost a great leader this week, Colin Powell, and he always said leadership is about solving problems. And I'm sure you've done that a lot of times, a lot of days, and a lot of nights over the last 2 years. Before I start my slides, I do want to acknowledge that it's been a grieving period for many people for lots of reasons, and you're coming through it, but we should all acknowledge how tough it's been for parents, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and how tough it's been for providers. The struggles to find staff, to keep staff, have been with us for years, but they're certainly compounded now. So we want to start our closing by thanking parents and thanking providers and thanking you. So I was just going to have a conversation, but I'm actually going to move to my slides now. I'm going to come back and have a conversation, but Richard really encouraged me to share some thoughts in a more formal way. I think this is a moment like few others we've ever had. And I'm always, because I've been in the field for 50 years, I know there's been other times, and I've said many times, this is a historic moment. Well, this really is a historic moment. If you would have all been in Washington, you would have been reading the Washington Post this morning when, our issues are on the front page. They were on the front page last week. They've been on the front page almost every day. I do think we're at the dawn of a new era. And I'm excited for all of you because you have been pioneers, but you're about to be tested again in what may happen over the next few months. So it's a great moment for all of us. So just moving on, I just want to acknowledge in the next slide, John, that we have had many other moments. And that's what I mean by reflecting back. I want us to think about, this is one of the original Head Start posters from the 60s. So I don't know, those children probably are 50 years old, 60 years old now. And one of the early childcare reports that said childcare at the time is now, and that was probably 30 years ago. But look, in 1935, the Maternal and Child Health Act passed. In 65, it was Head Start. In 1990, it was CCDBG. In 95, we started the Head Start office. We started Early Head Start. In 2009, it was when we brought together HHS and the Department of Ed. And I've always been proud that the title that Katie inherited and Miriam and Katie do together is a one of a liaison between the two departments. And that's been important. In 2011, we did the Early Learning Challenge. In 2014, we reauthorized CCDBG, and it goes on and on. So it's not that this has been the only moment, but it is a historic moment that I wanted to acknowledge. I was sharing with Richard, I have a slide deck of reports that I've gone through and that were in my basement during COVID, and I had time to look through them. And it was 50 years of reports, often with the same themes. So, I do think we're at a turning point, and I want to look forward. So let me tell you what I'm going to talk with you about. I want to talk about three things. First of all, I want to take us way back. You spent the last few days talking about very technical issues, but I'm going to take us back to the beginning and share with you the answer to a question someone asked me the other day. They said, what have been the guiding principles that have helped you through so many different changing times? So I want to share those with you. And they're very obvious and you know them, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm putting them back up there. Talk very quickly about implications of those principles for goals and visions. And I know you've done many hours of visioning in the States, and I want to share my emerging thinking about that. And then talk about 4 priorities, and I'll go quickly because there are so many priorities, but I want to share just a few of them with you. So if I could go to the first guiding principle, and again, the reason I'm sharing these is, for me, these are the reasons that we have to collaborate. These are the principles that I like to talk about when we talk about why we need to come together across ages and across years. And I always want to remind people of that. And the basic principle that's guided my life is that one developmental period builds on another. And I know that's obvious, but the prenatal age, the school entry, and then during the school age years. Now, I know you're sitting there going, well, Joan, that's so obvious. We know that. But then if we really believe that, we shouldn't be hearing so often, I only do babies. Or let's start with preschool because that's what people understand. Or I don't do school age kids because that's in another system. Our job as child development experts, as people that are trying to move the agenda forward, is to think about the continuum. So even if you've used this slide yourself many times, what I would urge you to do is take a set of pictures. This is my grandson. when we brought him home from the hospital, when he went to preschool, and in third grade. Use your own pictures, personalize this, but keep reinforcing the developmental continuum. That's what the B-5 grants were all about, and we have to keep saying that. And they have to go into good schools, or everything that is gained in those early years is in jeopardy. So if we go to the next simple developmental principle, and you've all talked about this a lot, that one domain of development, that domains of development are integrated, that learning affects health, that health affects learning, and social emotional development affects them all. So if we're so sure that everyone knows this, why is it that we still see places where the maternal and child health folks are not at the same table as the Department of Education? You have to believe in this principle, and you have to use it as a rationale for bringing people together. If we go to my third and final principle, before I talk about, well, let me just add one thing about integrated development. I wish I had a poll that I could ask you how many of you have heard about this framework, nurturing care. This is a framework that people all over the world are talking about, from Albania to Zimbabwe. The rest of the world is talking about a framework called nurturing care. And it is everything we all have been talking about here: health, nutrition, early learning, responsive caregiving, and safety and security. They're framing that as the elements of nurturing care. I want to particularly point to nutrition, because we just saw a report come out this week with a continuation of those obesity levels way too high in the preschool years. At the same time, we're seeing food shortages. So we have to take the time to look at this nurturing care framework and make it our own and make it part of our vision, because the domains of development are integrated. So let me now go to that third principle. And, this is the legacy of Yuri Brofenbrenner. And I, was lucky enough to live during his generation. And you've all used this many times, that children grow up in families and families live in communities. But we have to reflect on what that really means. This is the reason that we have to listen to families. This is the reason why we have to provide an enabling environment, not just information, but an enabling environment. I want to reinforce this notion of the enabling environment for families. Although I know you've heard it many times, this is a slide from the RAPID study. Many of you may know that we've been doing, this is the work of Dr. Phil Fisher. I chair his advisory. We've been surveying 1,000 parents every other week throughout the life of the pandemic. So we're on about month 19, I think 18 or 19. We've also recently started a childcare provider survey. And what we found early on was material hardship was associated with parent stress, was then associated with child behavior issues. I think that we all know that. But what that continues to tell us is that material hardship is part of what we have to pay attention to. And that what we're hearing more recently is that it's the unpredictability of families' lives that are causing a lot more emotional stress. So it's not just material hardship. And I think we can all think about this in our personal lives. It's not knowing what's coming next. Like, we all thought this was over, and it's not over. We all thought we'd be back to work, and we're not. We're hybrid, but we're not. So I think this unpredictability of that families are facing, that caregivers are facing, are really things we have to pay attention to. What we're finding in the survey is helping families maintain routines, helping us all maintain routines, and taking care of ourselves does make a difference. So those are my 3 developmental principles. You all know them, but I think we have to keep coming back to them. New people come into the field. We have to continue to reinforce that's the reason you can't just do a single program at a single point of time. You have to think about the developmental trajectory. And that's what we're after. Our goal in the field of early childhood is to optimize the potential that every child is born with. And I mean every child. There is no one that doesn't have potential that can't be fulfilled. Our goal is simply to reduce the risk factors, and not simply, it's not simple, to reduce the risk factors and increase the protective factors. We have to keep thinking about that. You know, what that means for me, and you've all done your visioning, you've done it many, many times. I think we owe a tremendous sense of gratitude to Bill and all the other system thinkers over the years who started with these ovals that were by sector: health, education, child protection, child welfare. And we began to think about how do we bring those together. I think we're at a different point now. I think we're at a point where we're no longer thinking about health and family support, but it's family support within a health think. We're not talking about care and education. I hope we're done with those separations that have historically plagued us, because as I continue to say, children learn everywhere. Every place is a learning environment. So for me, this middle set of bubbles here are the emerging subsystems that families encounter as their children grow. A family and health support system, a prevention system that connects them to service, and an early care and learning system. And the people in those two ovals are the parents and the caregivers. They are the bottom line of what good quality care is. It's not the fancy building, although I'd like to improve our facilities, but it is those interactions, as we all know. Those two pieces on the side are what they need. They need the supports they need. They need social networks and mental health supports, parents and caregivers, and they need higher ed opportunities, retraining, and economic support. We often assume now that it's families that need economic support. We have to start talking about how caregivers need economic support. So let me go to my priorities before I run out of time. I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to do it pretty quickly. I want to talk about the community movement that I see out there and I know was talked about during the conference. Secondly, I want to talk about the full cost of care and why I think that's so important. Third, and this comes the closest to home for all of you state administrators, we have to innovate around management. We have to reform government at every level. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to have my last priority go back to infants, although I think the continuum is so important, and just talk a little bit about the concept that Early Head Start provides for our infant and toddler services. So let me go, John, to the first slide about my priorities. Interesting. What I know there's a lot of talk, and for years we've talked about state-community relationships. Smart Start was one of the pioneers. California pioneered. First Things First, Arizona. We've pioneered around those things. Now I think there's a little bit of a difference. There's more community activity going on, as I know was reflected in several sessions, certainly Louisiana, Oregon, it's going on. But I think what's happening is that it's not just state to community. Where we want to go is community voices up, so that it's the community, the families in those communities that are having an impact on the decisions we make. And then that hopefully will be an influencer of what happens at the federal level. That's the ideal situation. It's not like this is a new idea. We've been talking about it. Caring Communities is a report that I worked on in 1991. Early Learning Communities was a report that came out, I think, in about 2010. When I first came back to government, I asked, I wanted the staff to hear from communities. So we started bringing in Palm Beach, Alameda, and just listening to them. And I always bring this slide with me. People that have heard me talk know that I just brought this to Nebraska with their wonderful community meeting that they recently had. This is a library set up in a laundromat. This is from a slide that I used from the Clinton Foundation initiative, Too Small to Fail. It's, to me, a picture of what I'm talking about. It's every place in a community is a learning place for children. And I think this is a good example. If I look at communities in the next slide, what I see them talking about, it's different in a place-based strategy, in a population-based strategy. It's not about a single program. What I see happening across the country everywhere is people coming together and saying, how do we make this the best place to raise a child? Every community across the country. How do we assure healthy pregnancies and birth, thriving at 3, confident and curious at school entry, and successful and well-rounded at 8? How do we look at our data? And I know data is a big challenge, particularly thriving at 3. But there are ways and there are data that you can look at. I remember having a great conversation with Bridgeport where they used their early Head Start data. And it didn't represent the whole community, but it was an indicator. So I'm excited about this community movement. I think it's a step forward for us to get out of our stovepipe silos, out of our single age, and really look across a community and come together and create a vision. And before I go to the next slide, I want to say about healthy pregnancies. I really hope we start seeing more dialogue between the OBGYNs and the pediatricians, because that really is where it all starts. What I want to reinforce again, and I know I've said this before, it's not just what happens in our program. So what I think is happening across the country is people are really focusing on social networks. It's been tough during COVID. They're thinking about community safety. They're thinking about green playgrounds and healthy food and community and family economic development. Some of the people working on community and economic development are the biggest champions for young children that we have. And certainly I couldn't speak to anybody without talking about affordable housing. We have a housing crisis. I can't imagine what families are going through when they have to move every few months and the disruption that provides to child development. We need many new partnerships with the housing community. And I think there's great things we can do together. So, that's what I'm excited about the community, but I also want to move on to my second priority, which really should be the first. I know that many of you are talking about the full cost. There was many sessions across all of the conferences that you go to about the full cost of care. But I'm going to reinforce it again. We absolutely need in every state a clear sense of what would it cost if we paid adequate and better wages and give providers benefits. We have to calculate that. We have to make sure we have a number, and it may take time to get there, but we have to find the gap. And everyone that's working on this should understand that number, how it was calculated, and what it means, and what's the steps to get there. I came into the field many years ago. I remember meeting, I was pregnant. My son is now 36. I was pregnant with him. When I met Marcy Whitebook and we started talking, I was so influenced by her and all the work she was doing on the workforce. It is a tragedy that we're still talking about this issue, but we're at a point that we cannot ignore this issue anymore. We don't have the workforce. I was driving down the street. I saw a too higher sign on a child care program. I did a little exploration. They were paying $12 an hour. I'm sure that's all they could afford with the market system that we have. And across the street, there was a coffee shop that was paying $15 an hour. do the math. We're not going to attract people. You know that. I know that, but it's time to get really tough about this. So if I can go to that third priority, and that is innovating management. I am worried that the capacity of the public sector, and I mean the governing sector at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level, to deliver, to execute the hopes of the public is a challenge unless we build up the public sector. I know you need better capacity, you need staff, you need innovation. I'm still hearing providers that are getting paid, 2 months after they do the work. I'm still hearing parents who complain about the process to access subsidy. I watched as we went from Title 20 centers years ago in 1990 to an all-voucher system with very poor reimbursement rates. We have to enter a new era around the management of the public sector dollars. We have to innovate. I think we need hackathons to think about new ideas about how we manage all this. I know there's great technology emerging, and we have to pay attention to that and make sure that we are supporting leadership development for people that want to work in the public sector, and be intentional about making sure that the people that are going to work in government reflect the cultures and the languages of the children that we're serving, and be intentional about assuring diversity. And then finally, let me move to my final priority. And this is my priorities. You have your priorities. And I hope they're common. But I've been blessed to be part of the Early Head Start journey. Early Head Start to me is not a program only. It's a concept. It's a concept for comprehensive services that I think can really be utilized in new ways. I want new federal resources into Early Head Start. I want to see conversion, especially as more preschool dollars come online and programs can convert if they have the resources and support to do it. But I also think that we've got an opportunity here as we redesign home visiting, parenting supports, and center-based services, childcare services, to think about Early Head Start as a model, as something that we can adapt and integrate into the standards that we're developing for those type of programs. It is prenatal to 3. It has flexible delivery. It can be home visiting. It can be childcare. It can be family, friends, and neighbors. It can be centers. It can be the vision for networks of support for family, friends, and neighbors. And I think Homegrown and many other people have talked about that over the years. It's 2-generation, which we need. It addresses the core elements of nurturing care. And more than anything, it's responsive to the culture and languages of the family and the community. And that's what we have to be all about. So take another look at Early Head Start when you have an opportunity to bring that community together with you to think about what we can learn. So I'm going to almost leave it there. I've got one more slide and then I'll go into a conversation. This is what it all comes down to, right? For all of us. This is a poster that UNESCO had put out about learning starts here. That was the title of this poster. To me, it says it's all about relationships. It's relationships between parents and children. It's relationships between children. It's relationships between providers and their peer group. And it's about our relationships with each other. And I would close my formal remarks by saying, pay attention to that. We're all in a big hurry. We're all trying to survive this very difficult period, but we only get through it with our relationships. So I'll close there and come back.
Thank you so much, Joan. That's fabulous. Thank you for your comments. What we're going to do now is we're going to start a question and answer period. I'm going to encourage folks who've been participants to put questions in the chat. I don't see any yet, but we do have a couple that Tammy and I wanted to ask Joan. And so we'll start with that, and hopefully you will be able to put in questions as well. If we get a lot of questions and can't cover them all, we'll create a Q&A document for some time after this session. But in any case, what we're going to do is we're going to have this dialogue with Joan for a little while, and then afterwards you'll hear from Tammy and me in talking about, well, what do you need to be thinking about for the next 14 months, and what happens next with the grant work that we're doing. So having said that, Joan, I'm going to start with the first question. You talked about all the work that you've done over the years. You've worked across preschool, Head Start, childcare. You've worked at the federal, state, local community levels. You've been a teacher, a parent, a public servant, a researcher, a foundation advisor. You've even advocated on the domestic and global fronts on what needs to happen, what needs to change. So you talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to spark a little bit deeper dive into what have you learned from this range of experiences?
Exhaustion. No, it's been an honor. I think it's enriched every other journey that I've had, because what do we know about relationships? It's about taking different perspectives, right? And you get that perspective when you have multiple roles. So I feel like I've been very lucky in being able to come in and out of things. With regard to children, the bottom line for me is it doesn't matter what the name on the door is. It doesn't matter what the funding stream is. This is crazy. I've been in hearing rooms where they have been debating, we have to have higher standards on this program. And then the next day, and this literally happened to me once, they have a debate about we can't have federal standards for this program. It's the same children. And so I've really come to appreciate multiple perspectives. I've come to appreciate that we have to start focusing on what's good for children, regardless of the funding stream. And I know that's hard because it comes with limitations on what you can do. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that it's all about equity. And I know we have a lot of debates about, do we do universal? Do we do targeted? I think in many ways those are really difficult conversations.
Yeah.
For me, if it's our goal in early childhood, that's why I put that slide up about optimal development, is addressing equity and is assuring that everybody has a fair start. And that means addressing the linguistic and cultural and racial needs that children have right from the beginning and acknowledging who they are and what they need. Universal services are great. Children with special challenges need more intense services. So, we have to have kind of a progressive universal, is what they call it out of the country, approach to this, where we acknowledge what everybody needs, but we pay special attention to assuring we have racial justice and equity. And that's part of our culture in early childhood.
Thank you, Joan. That was very, very good. But Joan, you worked in the field and you worked across 3 administrations. You served as a public servant for more than 10 years cumulatively. What are some of the lessons learned, and how would you recommend states strategize with their political and non-political stakeholders to garner support for the necessary to sustain the work and the improvements that they've made in their early care and education system?
Well, I thanks for asking me that, Tammy. I'm so proud of so many things, but I'm really proud of being a public servant. And I feel like in many ways that's defined me in a good way. And it's very painful for all of us that have been in government and all of you that have been in government to hear people not respect what people do in government. And I don't mean that for myself. I mean that for many of the civil servants that are there that I know work so hard every day, and for all of you that work in state government. So, I've gained that deep respect for public service and also for the role that you play inside and outside government. So you come and go. I came into government as an advocate. I came into government as an advocate almost right from the beginning. And one of my biggest happiest moments was when someone said to me, "You remained an advocate in government," because I tried to do that, and I was proud of that. However, I knew once I got into government, I had a little bit of a different role. And so working with the outside, listening, bringing people in, knowing what I could do versus what other people could do, I think that's important. I've been lucky. I was one of the founders of the Alliance which is now the Alliance for Early Success. And I don't know if some of the people in the audience are on their listserv, but it has been amazing to me what the advocates have done over the last few years to keep the drumbeat so we still have this issue on the front page. It was them that did it, along with people who are working in government. So you got to bring those two things together. And I know this isn't popular, but it's got to remain bipartisan. That's why it does. And, even though I've been in obviously, certain kinds of administrations, I really hope that we keep the issue bipartisan.
Okay. Joan, let's go back to some of your priorities. Do you want to expand on any of them or anything you left out that you want to be sure that our audience here today really hears something to resonate with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's current priorities, there's old priorities, there's new priorities. I think right now I am, obviously I'm hoping the priority is that Congress acts and that we get the all of the wonderful proposals that the president put on the table. I am concerned about the emotional toll that COVID has taken on everybody, on children, on parents. And I know there's a lot of focus on learning loss, but we have to be focused on the emotional loss that we've all felt. I went into Georgetown yesterday and I met with some students for the first time in person. And I was nervous. I was nervous, and it wasn't just because we were wearing masks and it was the first time. It was that I was out of my house, for one of the first times. So we've gone through a lot, and we got to take time to deal with that and give ourselves a little bit of a break and help families through it, help children through it. So that's one of the things I didn't get to, but I wanted to say that. On an old priority, I think it's still about this economic support for parents and caregivers. And I think it's going to define what we do with the new money. On the new priorities, I think climate change is a children's issue. We're seeing environmental risks all over the world, in the United States. I mean, the environmental risks, the air quality issues, the water quality issues. So climate change is an early childhood issue. And I think we're going to hear more about that. And we're going to have to think about how we're preparing children to live in a very changing world and what that means, and how we help prioritize that.
Thank you.
Joan, we have a comment from Wei Bing Chen. She says, thanks for your comments. I fully agree with you, but I'm part of the choir. So what are your strategies for talking to folks who don't have our perspective on the importance of public investment in the early years? The other day, I heard a senator from an unnamed state say that childcare is not infrastructure.
Yeah, well, they're wrong. I think that's why I go back to child development principles. Honestly, because we talk a lot of jargon. I do too. We talk a lot of jargon in the field. You've got to bring it down to families. And I've felt this way for a long time. I'm not the voice. I'm not the messenger anymore. Other people are the messengers. And that, I think, has moved the agenda much further. I mean, it's the economists. It's the business community. It's all those aligned players. It's parents. Parents, I think, are the best messengers. So it's not a simple answer. And, be persistent. If I can stay at this long, you can stay at this long.
So there's another question from Suzanne Burnett. She says, we talk about equity. However, early Head Start teachers, home visitors are paid less and have less education than our preschool teachers. Programs can't keep infant and toddler teachers. My question, should we focus on the benefits of raising the bar for infant toddler teachers? Most programs must have preschool in order to pay for infant toddler teachers. We need to have pension plans and better healthcare benefits in order to retain qualified staff. I'm not sure that's a question, but it's a statement. But I think she's looking for you to say, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, Suzanne, that was nice to hear you. And I'm sure there's lots of other people that are out in the audience listening that I would love to say hello to and reconnect with. Of course, we know that infant toddler providers are being paid significantly less than preschool teachers, even with the same qualifications. But I would say it's not just center-based teachers. It's kith and kin providers, it's family child care providers. You have to raise the bar for all of them. I am particularly worried about infant toddler providers because as preschool is integrated into a mixed delivery system, which of course I believe in 100%, and I should say a mixed delivery system includes schools. It's not a mixed delivery versus schools. No, that's not, and Tammy didn't, tee that up. That's coming from my heart. Schools are the largest child providing agency in a community. So they have to be part of our mixed delivery system, but it is a mixed delivery system, and because parents want that. And so I think as preschool dollars come into the system, we'll have more opportunities to raise salaries than we may for infant toddler providers. That's probably why Suzanne raised it. So we're going to have to make special efforts there.
Thanks, Joan. I don't see any other questions coming in from the chat. So we'll just ask you if you have any other final comments, anything else that you'd like to say in closing before, and then once you do that, then Tammy and I are going to talk to the group about the next 14 months and some of the focus areas, what we heard from the conference, etc.
Well, thanks for letting me have one final word. I am, you can hear it in my voice. It's hard not to see people. It's hard not to be with you and hug you and really share. So I want to thank you for giving me this one opportunity. I'm like the old dog coming back here. I love the field. I love the people in the field with all my heart. I love children. And I know you do too. And my goal is very simple. Shannon Rudisill asked me this when I came back in the Obama administration. She said, "What's the goal?" And I said, "Joy, happy, healthy, joyful children." That's what I want everybody to hold on to. And time goes fast, people. So make the most of what you have, what the job you have in front of you, and do not give up. And know you can make a difference because you can.
Thanks, Joan.
Thank you, Joan.
This is just a comment if folks haven't seen it in the chat. Aaron said, "I recently watched No Small Matter documentary, powerful perspective about the importance of early learning. Was a military person about how it's important to the security of our nation."
Yes, sir.
So just as a alert to everybody. All right. Well, Joan, thank you so much for your time with us. We really appreciate you giving these closing comments. And it's always great to see you and work with you. So keep it up. We'll be talking to you soon. So, folks, what we're going to do now is we are going to split some time. Tammy is going to talk to you about some topics, and I'll talk to you about some other topics, and then we'll wrap up. If you have questions as we're talking, you can put them in the chat. But if not, that's okay also. And let's see how we can wrap this up and end the week on some positive and hopefully notes of support to you that you know that at the federal level we're here to support you in as many ways as we can. So Tammy, do you want to get us started?
Yes, again, I just would like to thank everybody for joining us for the last 4 days. And I hope you found the last 4 days insightful and that you learned something new and different that can be useful to your work. We heard a lot about the impacts of the PDG Birth to 5 from several states, and we look forward to the continued impacts and improvements over the next 14 months. As Richard said, we just want to talk to you guys about some things of, what is the key things you could be thinking about over the next 14 months? And one is sustainability. We want you to think about what the key and necessary structures are to help sustain the work you have completed over the last 3 to 4 years. We also ask you to think about how you can ensure that the current and new colleagues entering your state's early childhood systems will have what they need to continue the partnerships, the activities, and the best practices established over the past 4 years. For example, making sure agreements are updated, documenting formal and informal coordination between programs and resource sharing, and just thinking about how your work that you've done over the last 4 years, and in some cases prior to the 4 years, can live on. The other piece that was a very, very common theme, partnerships. This was a common theme throughout the meeting, and the importance of partnerships and the lessons learned and the successes from these partnerships. We're just asking you to make sure that you have engaged your community-based organizations, other state agencies, and families as important and significant contributors to the policy making and quality improvements to your early childhood and education mixed delivery systems. And we also want you to continue to think about your partnerships. Identify the potential new partners to invite to the table to assist your state's early childhood and education vision in the goals and improvements to your mixed delivery system. We can't emphasize enough. I think I was in several sessions, and even when the session wasn't focused on partnerships always was a theme that continued to come up across the sessions about the importance of their partners. And then there's the third part that has also been a theme, and that's equity. And as we all know, the administration has identified equity as a priority and is committed to ensuring that federal funding for programs and services intentionally focus on equity and the impacts to communities, children, families, and the workforce. So we're asking you to think about equity broadly, removing the barriers to access quality resources, teacher training, opportunities, and policies that impact children and family experiences. We also finally say, continue to be purposefully think about equity as part of your system planning, policy decision-making, by engaging in conversations with communities and folks who can provide the necessary insights and insights to policies and practices to eliminate inequitable opportunities for children, families, and the early childhood and education workforce. So these are just some things that we believe that you could be thinking about. We heard throughout the conference, a lot of you are already thinking about these things. A lot of people talked about equity and how that has been a challenge and some work that you're intentionally focusing on. We talked about the partnerships happening. And so sustainability has always been a piece. You know, we've been at this for a while, as Joan said. And so it would be good to see us locking in some of the work, the good work that you've done over the last 3 to 4 years. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Richard, and he's going to share some of the programmatic things that are coming up in the next 14 months.
Thanks a lot, Tammy. Mm-hmm. So I tried to guess some of the questions that you guys might have or want to know more about. So I wanted to let you know, first of all, just about everybody has submitted their non-competing continuation applications, the renewal grantees. And we will be actually processing them in November. So you'll actually get you'll probably all get your award notices in November, even though the award itself won't trigger into effect until December 31st of this year. But thank you for those of you who've submitted, for those of you who have some follow-up documents. I know Sherry has sent some questions to people if there were pieces missing or information that wasn't clear. So we'll be rolling those out in groupings, but you'll have those awards in plenty of time, probably before, well, certainly before December, maybe even before Thanksgiving. So you know about that. There were some questions about the APPR revisions and what the next step is. So some of you on the call know that we've revised the APPR submission document or process as well. I, like you, have been tied up in the convening all week, so I have not worked on that. But starting on Monday, I will be pulling together the package for OMB. We also are hoping that process and the feedback from OMB will come to us before Thanksgiving. We believe that could be done in that time frame. I guess if we run into any pushback, we'll let you know. But the point I want to make about this, the new process, is twofold. One is, even if we didn't get approval from OMB, these are the kinds of questions you should be asking and targeting for your own stakeholders, for your own state legislature, for your governor, et cetera. These are the things that are going to be important. If we are able to use these questions are going to generate the report to Congress and to both Ed and HHS Secretary at the end of 2022. In the meanwhile, we're about to do the congressional report that's based on the initial grant work. So because states had so much time because of COVID, and then because you had 6 more months to submit your final reports, your initial grant final reports, we're now consolidating that information. We're going to be using that information to submit the 2021, probably won't get submitted until the end of March, but 2022 congressional report and secretary report on the work you've done. So there was a lot of great stuff we heard in this convening, and there's a lot of great information that you've included in those reports that we hope to highlight. Clearly, in the next months, you're going to want to continue the work you're doing. This fabulous work. I mean, like many of you, I could only be in one place at a time. So there were so many other sessions that I couldn't participate in. But every session I participated in gave me some new nugget of information, gave me some new idea to think about or to expand on. So continue all that great work you're doing, particularly around coordinated applications, around data collection and use, around equity, around partnerships, around sustainability. All that stuff has to continue. I do want to say, for all the folks who are on this call who did not get a renewal grant or even did not get an initial PDG grant, there is the possibility, it is only a possibility, but it is a possibility that when Congress passes this next budget, not having to do with the American Families Plan or Build Back Better, but this year's fiscal budget, there is earmarked, or there was requested money to be able to do another competition for those states that did not have a PDG grant initially or have not had a renewal grant. So you may want to brush off some of the work that you've done in the past and get ready. I don't know how the funding announcement will change, but we'll be working on that. And if that funding gets approved, there will be another competition for those who did not have those funds. The other thing is, please continue to tell your stories, share your progress, share your successes. There were so many great stories shared in this week, and I'm hoping you're finding ways to do that within your state. Remember to continue to revise your needs assessments and your strategic plans and your PPEPs, because that's for you. You gave us what we needed for a requirement, but those are the things that are going to move you forward. And I think you heard that from a number of the participants talking about the importance of their strategic plan or their needs assessment, or what they were evaluating in terms of determining if they were on the right path. So please do that. There is an expectation that you will do. There is an expectation that you will do another needs assessment before the 3 years are up. But at the same time, most of you are doing that because of COVID anyhow, but that is not something that you necessarily need to submit to us. It's really a strong recommendation that you do that before the grant ends. If in areas where you're having difficulty implementing statewide, please highlight those local communities you heard Joan talk about, pilot ideas. You've heard Tammy and me say to you before, look, if you succeed, we succeed. If you fail, we fail. We're in that same boat together. So put forth your proposals, ask your bold ideas, see if there's ways we can help you. When we have the flexibility, we will do so. I did want to mention a couple of other things. Remember that you like in yesterday's closing plenary, state plenary, there were two statements made that I want to comment on. One was that hopefully the federal government will continue to fund states in their efforts. Mm-hmm. There is nothing that would please us more to do that. But I want you to, I think you know this, but I want to reiterate that we only get to do that if Congress gives us the funds. If Congress allocates funds for those purposes, then we get to turn it into those program initiatives to fund you. So it's not really up to us. It's up to them. And therefore, it's up to you. It's up to the advocates in the state. It's up to people talking about what's important. And just like you heard Kelly and others talk yesterday about how state legislature was tied back into strategic plans that were developed in the state, and that PDG was a game changer. So many of you talked about it being a game changer for how you move forward in your state. That is the same thing that's going to influence decisions at the federal congressional level, and therefore allow us at the federal government level to continue to fund you. And then one other thing someone asked about or recommendation was better coordination at the federal level. Across funding opportunities. And I do want you to know that we already have been working on that. So we have a number of work groups together. We're working on aligning needs assessments across different funding opportunities. We're working on how to put out guidance and support across our program funding, across our agencies and offices on how to support social, emotional, and mental health efforts or equity issues. You're going to see, you've seen, and you're going to continue to see these Dear Colleague letters, which are signed by multiple players across offices and agencies. So we're going to continue to try to do a better job at that. We actually do better because you do better. So many times we take lessons from you at the state level and say, hey, if the state can do this, we can do this. Come on, let's get to work on this. So we're working on those things. We want you to know that. So what I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to end with a couple of scenarios. So I don't know how many of you out there are Star Trek fans, but I'm a Star Trek fan. And so some of you may know about the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario. And if you don't know about it, it's a scenario where basically the purpose is to give cadets the experience of fear in the face of certain death and learn how to remain in control of themselves and their ship despite their fear. And the problem with this scenario is that there's no way to win. Like no matter how you play it, you end up losing. And so Captain Kirk, our original Star Trek captain, decided that he was going to basically cheat. That was one way to look at it. I wouldn't call it cheating. I actually call it changing the question. So what he did was he changed the conditions of the test. He reprogrammed the simulation so that it was possible to rescue the ship and win. And basically, he created a win-win situation. Ironically, he was then awarded not for beating the test, but because of his original thinking. And really, that's one of the challenges to me. It's actually, I love the lesson because it's kind of a lesson to me about how we sometimes get stopped by our fear. We sometimes get stopped by, what if this doesn't work, or that's not what the rules are. And sometimes you need to change the question. You need to change the way you approach the problem. So that kind of innovative thinking that Joan was talking about is really important. By the way, the movie Dune is coming out. And if you're a Dune fan, you're going to also remember that there is a quote there that says, "Fear is the mind killer, and I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me." And bottom line is, I actually focus on these things because, to be very honest with you, sometimes I'm fearful in my own work, right? How am I going to get this done? Well, there's just too many things to face. I can't do it all at the same time. And remembering that there's certain things we control, that we can influence, and then there's others that we can't. And we just got to do the best we can so that at the end of the day, we can put our head on our pillow, go to sleep, and know that we did as best we could today, and tomorrow is another day. So last thoughts. Are Stephen Covey's 7 habits. And for those of you who know his 7 habits, the first one is about being proactive, which I think all of us are doing, right? We're focusing and acting on what we can control and influence instead of what we can't. We're beginning with the end in mind. So we're trying to figure out what is it that we want to get to? What is the goal? What define our measure of success and how we're going to achieve it? So we're doing that visioning and goal setting. We're putting first things first. So again, prioritize. What's the most important things? If we can't do everything, what are the things that we have to spend our most time on? And try to separate out those things that are important from those things that are urgent, but not necessarily as important. Thinking win-win, right? How do you collaborate? This is about the partnerships. What's in it? If you're trying to create partnerships, how do you create a situation where everybody wins? Not someone losing something in the game. So collaborating more effectively by building those high trust relationships. And you heard several people today talk about the time it takes. This to me is probably the most important principle that Covey talks about. And it's seek first to understand and then to be understood. So the best way to influence others is by developing a deep understanding of their needs and their perspective. The more you understand them, the better you can address what they're afraid of, what they're worried about, what they think they need to do, what are the priorities. And then you can begin to answer those things. And maybe once they know they're heard, once they know you understand the perspective, they're in a better position to listen to what your perspective is. Then, of course, we have what we see happening throughout this whole convening, the synergy, the synergizing, right? Developing innovative solutions that leverage diversity and that satisfy stakeholders, because we can do so much more together than we can do separately. And then finally, sharpening the saw. So increasing our motivation, increasing our energy, which this convening has done, right? But also remembering the work-life balance that we need to have for making time for renewing those activities that we need to have. So my last story, or my last piece of information I want to share with you, is a personal story. And I'm going to tell you this personal story because it goes back to something that was asked in the very beginning, the opening session, when people were saying, well, you know, how do we as states decide to give more money to staff or to providers when we don't know how long this funding is going to last? What if the funding dries up? I think that's the fear factor kicking in again, right? Yeah. But we've got to think about salaries and benefits and incentives and bonuses and improved provider payment rates and just mental health and other supports for staff. Get as much as you can done with the resources you have now. Someone said that in one of our sessions, and I think it's brilliant. Like, we can't worry about what's going to be coming 3 years from now. What do we have right in front of us now, and what do we do with it? So in saying that, I challenge us all to be bold, to be creative, be innovative. And I want to share a personal story with you. When I was in college a long, long time ago, for some of you who weren't even born yet, but when I was in college, I was taking a class. It was a music appreciation class, and the final exam had to be where we were going to, the instructor told us, I'm going to give you 25 questions, narrative question. I'm going to ask you to answer. I'm going to tell you ahead of time the 25 topics that I'm going to choose from. And then I just want you to write the paper, your report, based on those 25 topics. So me and my wisdom, thinking I know best, said, I don't have time to study 25 topics. I'm going to pick the 12 or 13 that I think he's going to pick. And so I focused on 12. He said there were going to be 12 items on the on the test. I focused on 13 items, and I kind of really figured out what my answers were going to be for those 13 items. The final exam came, and on that final exam, only 2 of the 13 items I selected was on the final exam. So there was no way in hell I was going to pass this exam. I mean, it just couldn't happen. I didn't even have a clue. I could have written a sentence or two about the others, but I could not pass. So I sat there, and in that moment, I decided, what are my options? And I decided my options were to change the question. So what I did was I said something like, I know that you've posed these 12 questions for us to answer, but the real purpose of this class and your instruction was to see how much I could learn over the course of the year. So I am now going to share with you the knowledge that I have gained from your teaching and the wonderful qualities of this course. And then I proceeded to answer the 12 questions that I had studied. Now, I figure I have nothing to lose because I'm failing the test anyhow. As it turns out, the instructor was so tickled by the fact that I would even try this that he ended up giving me an A, which is like unheard of because a lot of professors wouldn't have done that. And it could have easily have been a D or an F, right? But the point being that sometimes we have to take a chance to look at what's in front of us, change the question, do what we can do, share what we do know, and just hope for the best. And more times than not, that's going to work out. And this is the thank you to everybody here. I mean, first of all, this convening, from my perspective, from Tammy's perspective, we talked about this before, it was fabulous. So thank you all to SRI, to all the partners, ICF and ANLA and Georgetown and NEAR. Thank you for all the TA specialists, and for Missy and Deborah. You see the names here, right? Faith and Howard and Neil, Mandy, Pamela, Sally, Stephanie. There's probably other names missing. A particular thank you, particular to Sarah and Greta. This conference could not have happened if we did not have the logistic support. And then all those names that are not there that provided logistic support, that were with us in our sessions, that helped to make sure that we could present to you without glitches, and that could help answer your questions when you ran into trouble. We have a planning committee here made up of federal staff as well as grantee staff. So thank you all to everybody there. To our wonderful presenters. You guys did an amazing job. And what's great about that is I think we heard from almost every state and territory in a presentation of one kind or another. So thank you all. And thank you for the participants, because guess what? If you hadn't come, if you hadn't attended and listened and been here, it wouldn't have mattered that we put all this together. So hopefully the information that we've put together is the kind of information that you can now take and run with. My last comments have to do with, I know you're wondering, well, how do I get this information? Well, you've accessed this attendee hub, and you can continue to access this attendee hub for the next couple of months. So if you come back, you can hear the plenaries on demand. You can see the documents that were supported in the session tabs. So go to all sessions. And in the meantime, SRI and their partners are going to be working on making the individual workshop recordings 508 compliant so that they can be posted on our websites and made available to you by the end of the year, certainly. And so please feel free to do that. You see here the slide where remembering, listen, it is really important for us to get your evaluations. I hope you can say, as you look at this convening, wow, I wrote this on last year's evaluation and they actually did it. Because we spent a lot of time reading those comments that you sent back and considering how to be responsive to your feedback. That is the same thing that changed the APPR process. Yes. We listened to your feedback, we listened to your suggestions, and we made changes. So if you really have concerns about anything that happened here, or you thought it could have been done better, or you wish that there had been more clarity or support in one way or another, or maybe you were really excited, please don't change this aspect of the convening. Let us know. Now, we are all hoping that we are going to see you all in person in October 2022. And we are aiming our efforts for that purpose. But if we don't, we know we'll have a great convening because we've gotten better. Last year, SRI and their team did a tremendous job, and they only had 8 weeks to prepare. This week, we've had more time, and I hope you see improvements in what we've been able to do. Last announcements, if you're interested in the PPEP, there's a webinar on November 16th that is going to take place. You should have seen an announcement in the newsletter, in the PDG Birth to 5 newsletter. You'll see other announcements. If you have questions that come after this convening, remember you can always email PDG B5TA or PDG-convening, and folks can answer your questions as well. And of course, you can always talk to your TA specialist. And I realize I just forgot one important group of people to give thanks to, and that was all of my colleagues, all of the colleagues in HHS and ACF and the Department of Ed. Not only the federal project officers working with you, but all the other staff who've been working. So when you talked about coordination before, we've had people working from CDC and SAMHSA and HRSA and OSEP and other agencies that we could pull in. We've also had a lot of participants here from all the various TA centers. And helping us with their knowledge and making sure that we together can support your efforts in the state, regardless of where you're focused. So making sure that the right TA center is there to help you, but collaborating across all of our efforts to support you. So with that, I've probably said a lot more than I originally thought I was going to say, but you guys know I love to talk, and you give me the opportunity, I can't stop. So except I am going to stop now. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Richard,
we'll see you soon.
for the words of inspiration.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.